Welcome everybody to the 215 session of Nerd Summit 2020. This session is Evergreen Software Development, Shipping a Redesign of Enrollment Apps on Healthcare.gov by Hannah Liebel. So feel free to take it away.
All right. So my name is Hannah, like she said. This talk will be about 30 or 35 minutes long, and we'll have some more technical parts, but I tried to make this I'm going to try to, there's only 2 slides with code on them, so I'm hoping that if you don't have specific background in the things I'm talking about, it's still somewhat useful. Oh boy, I have to be in. Oh, that worked. Sorry, I'm not used to actually giving a presentation through Zoom. So first, a little bit about me. I'm a software engineer at a company called Ad Hoc. I've been there for about 3 years. I used to live in Western Mass, though these days I live in New Jersey, so I'm coming to you live from Jersey. You can find me on the internet in a variety of places. Probably the easiest way to get in touch. I'm in the Nerd Slack as well, but is Twitter. I don't tweet about tech that much, but you can follow me if you want. I have a website that I sometimes update as well. So what is Ad Hoc? Ad Hoc is the company I work for, and I want to talk a little bit about it because what I'm covering in this talk is all related to the work that Ad Hoc does and the philosophies they try to embody when it comes to software development. So you maybe remember that in 2013, Healthcare.gov was launched, and it didn't go very well, to put it mildly. On the first day, only 6 people were able to enroll in healthcare plans, which is bad because, in a regular year, open enrollment period, millions of people enroll in plans. So the Obama administration brought people in from the private sector, from Silicon Valley, places like that, to fix the site. And the 2 co-founders of Ad Hoc were part of that initial group. In fact, our CTO, Paul, is this man in the back here in glasses. This was a Time magazine article that was written about this rescue effort, basically. That initial team that was tasked with fixing Healthcare.gov was known as the Ad Hoc team, and that's how the company Ad Hoc got its name. So Ad Hoc, or at least the people who eventually went on to found Ad Hoc, they've been involved with Healthcare.gov in one way or another from the very early days on. So for over 6 years or so now. And 6 years is really a long time on the internet. Before Ad Hoc, I worked for some startups. And maybe you've had this experience too, but a lot of what I worked on at those startups doesn't exist anymore. And sometimes because the company itself doesn't exist or the software has been changed so much. But the thing about government sites and services is that they tend to stick around, both because they're mandated to exist by law, but also because millions of people need to use them. So the questions about how to maintain and support websites that are getting relatively long in the tooth is one that Ad Hoc is quite familiar with, and one that I learned a lot about via working at the company. And so this talk is about strategies for supporting web applications that need to exist for years. Ad Hoc has developed a digital services playbook, which describes lessons learned from working on government digital services. This is one quote from that playbook, and the last line in it is important. It says, "The priority is to maintain continuous service while improving it." And this is what we call Evergreen Development. And it's important for digital services, but I would also argue that it's important for everyone who wants to build lasting web applications. So I'd say the overarching question we want to answer with Evergreen software development is how do we maintain a high level of service, but also make sure that what we are maintaining doesn't become legacy software. Legacy software is a problem, certainly in the public sector, but in the private sphere as well, especially on the web and in the front-end world where things change so quickly. Some questions that are important to consider are listed on this slide. So thinking about different timescales can be useful here. So will what we are building now look months from now or years from now? Will new team members be able to work on our software easily in the future? Will we be able to continue to gracefully add features now and in the future? And these are all things that become more difficult as what we're working on becomes legacy. And I'll have some more data from a front-end perspective a few slides from now about how to evaluate technologies and see if they're at risk for becoming legacy. But for now, let me introduce you to the apps that my team supports. So it's through these apps that I will learn how we applied some of these principles of evergreen software development to update and redesign them successfully in time for the most recent open enrollment period on Healthcare.gov, which was the fall and winter of this past year. Open enrollment is when, if you can get healthcare through the federal exchanges in your state, you can every year apply for the next year's healthcare plans. So my team is known as the Enroll team because most of what we are building and supporting deals specifically with the experience of shopping for and then enrolling in healthcare plans. The odd one out in the 3 apps that we support is called Tax Tools. It's not directly related to healthcare enrollment, but you enter in some household values and location information, and then this tool gives you some healthcare premium values needed to fill out some tax forms. This is a front-end only app. It's a single-page application. Window shopping is the next app we support. It's likewise a front-end only app. It's how people can preview healthcare plans and prices without needing an account or logging into Healthcare.gov. And finally, there's Plan Compare. This is how you actually enroll in and compare plans when you're logged into your account on Healthcare.gov. So a lot of it is on the front end, but there is some back end portion to this app as well. All of these apps were built with AngularJS. So maybe if you're familiar with the Angular/JavaScript world, you can maybe begin to see why we would consider these apps legacy or at risk of becoming so. The versions of these apps that my team inherited have been in existence since 2015 or 2016. And no one on my team now were the people who originally built them. So we all got to experience what it's like to inherit complex software and be asked to maintain it. So let's take a brief aside to talk about AngularJS, because in 2020, you may not be familiar with this particular framework. Google released AngularJS in 2009 and announced that it was entering long-term support mode in the summer of 2018. I added the API, a screenshot of the API docs here. You can see that's called out in that little yellow call out there. And this basically means that Google will only release updates related to security for a 3-year period of time, but stop doing any other development on the project. So this is a potentially concerning development if you have 3 large apps running on a framework that's not being actively updated anymore. AngularJS features 2-way data binding, which means that the data from the view gets propagated back to the model and vice versa, auto-magically. This way of binding state to the view in applications has gone somewhat out of style in recent years because it is a bit magical and can be confusing to reason about, and led to some performance issues in the framework as well. And that's another thing about AngularJS. It's a full framework. It's not just a library. From the Angular docs, it says, it handles all of the DOM and AJAX glue code you once wrote by hand and puts it in a well-defined structure. This makes AngularJS opinionated about how a CRUD, create, read, update, delete application should be built. So in general, when you use AngularJS, you are buying into this opinionated way of writing web apps and using AngularJS as the ecosystem for the entirety of the front end of your app. It's not just a view layer, it handles other things as well. Confusing thing about AngularJS is that Google announced a new version of Angular in the fall of 2016. At the time, this was known as Angular 2, but now it's known as just Angular. And Angular was a full rewrite of AngularJS, and the upgrade path between the two wasn't seamless. It's a very different framework in some ways. For example, it got rid of almost all of the 2-way data binding that was a part of AngularJS. And so that's why I'm trying to be clear in this presentation and say AngularJS instead of Angular, but I'll probably mess up. But we were on the older version of this framework. All right, so that's where we were, and now let's talk about where we wanted to be. So we wanted to use React for the view layer and then do state management with a library called Redux. These are both open sourced libraries. React was started by and maintained by Facebook. React uses one-way data flow, which, as I talked about earlier, can be potentially an easier way to structure state flow in your app. React and Redux are libraries. I have trouble saying that word for some reason. I don't know why, so I apologize. Library. They're libraries and not frameworks, right? And people like to argue about this all the time. But the React docs themselves say that React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So React is really just about the view layer, and Redux is a solution for managing and organizing global application state. And this can be a better way to think about writing applications because it makes swapping out one library for another easier than decoupling an entire web framework. I'm not saying it's easy to do that, but it's definitely easier. Another reason for going to React for us was that the government agency that manages Healthcare.gov, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, has an open source design system that Ad Hoc inherited from another contractor in, I believe, 2017 or 2018. And the CMS design system comes with a library of React components that include a lot of low-level and useful pieces of UI like forms, alerts, buttons, things like that. And so we wanted to be able to use those components to more easily build our apps and unify their designs and user experience. And the only way to do that was to go to React. So along with that, a long-term goal was that we actually wanted to take the opportunity to not just update the internal JavaScript that we use on these projects to a more modern set of tools, but we wanted to redesign the apps. A lot of work by UX researchers and designers at Ad Hoc went into coming up with new designs based on the CMS design system. And this was a great opportunity for us to do that as well. We also wanted to add type safety to our JavaScript, and we chose Flow. And this is not really the focus of this talk, and you could write a whole other talk about type safety in JavaScript. I actually think if I were to do it today, I'd probably choose TypeScript, but in any case, some type of type safety was better than none for us. Another reason for choosing React is developer happiness and considerations for hiring in the future. This chart is from the State of JS survey from 2019. It's an annual online survey that 20,000 or so people fill out about JavaScript. And you can see that React and Redux are in the upper right quadrant, which is optimal because that means they have a high usage and a high satisfaction response rate from people who fill out the survey. And Angular is down in this quadrant. It's unclear whether they mean AngularJS or Angular or both. Still decently high usage, but definitely less satisfaction. And data like this isn't perfect, right? It's just one survey, but it can help paint a picture of trends. You can also look at Google Trends. That's another way to search for like JavaScript libraries, and it's very apparent that there was a change in React and Angular in, I think it was, I wish I would have screenshot it, maybe it was 2017 or so. And anecdotally in 2017, when I was moving across the country and was looking for a new job because I knew I was moving, almost every job listing I looked at mentioned React. And it seems to be in some ways moving towards the standard way to write applications in JavaScript. And these trends matter because if we want to, support our software in the long run, you want to have good people working on it. And how many new developers in 2020 are going to be learning AngularJS versus React? And probably more importantly, how many developers are going to want to work with AngularJS versus work with React? So those are the things to keep in mind. All right, so I've covered where we were and where we want to be. So now how do you actually go about updating software that's maybe becoming legacy software? As best I can tell, there's really two ways to do it. One is to rewrite it entirely. Maybe you would either branch off of your project or start a new project entirely. And then no matter how you do it, at the end, you completely replace the old app with a new one. So one big change, basically. And the other option is incremental change. You fold changes into your master branch over a longer period of time. Ideally, you're able to release those changes every sprint or whatever your cadence is. Utilize feature flags to keep new work and designs from being available to the consumer until you're ready to show them. So let's talk about rewriting an app first, because conceptually it's a bit more straightforward. Some things you may want to consider. As you're working on the new app, do you need to keep supporting and or developing the old version of the app? And if so, do you have the resources to devote to a rewrite and supporting the old app as it gets rewritten? Do you have the resources to fully test the new version? It may be easier, I think this is debatable, but it may be easier with incremental approaches to test smaller changes over time. And then, do you completely understand the business logic of the app that you're rewriting? This may sound obvious, but if you're rewriting an app in one go, it means you have the freedom to change a lot of things at once. But doing that without completely understanding the business logic of the app that you're trying to replace can get you into trouble. So the app that we chose to rewrite was Tax Tools. Tax Tools is somewhat unique in that it's mostly used during tax season. So it's very seasonal. It doesn't need a lot of updates or work outside of that. So we could safely rewrite it and not worry about needing to update the old app at the same time. Tax Tools is also the least complex of the apps that we work on, so that made it also a good candidate to rewrite. We moved the AngularJS app to a branch, and then on master we deleted everything and used create React app to bootstrap a fresh React project. Create React app is a command line utility that Facebook puts out that does all the tooling for you to start a fresh React project. We wrote the app with Redux. We used the CMS design system components, and we were able to finish it in time for the 2018 tax season. I actually ran the legacy branch that still exists in GitHub to get the screenshot from the top, which is the old entry page to our app, and this is the new one. So you can see it's completely redesigned, but more importantly for us, it's no longer built with AngularJS. An incremental approach requires more effort and more discussion of how to do it. So let's start with the view layer. A website or a web app or a, whatever you want to call it is a tree of DOM nodes, right? And most, probably all JavaScript libraries or frameworks help you build your UI like this. So you can think of your app as a tree of components of some sort. And so for us, it didn't make sense to deal with the problem of rendering Angular inside of React. We wanted to convert something to React and then not worry about working with any Angular inside of it. So we did the opposite, and we opted to render React inside of Angular, starting with the outermost leaves of our component tree and then slowly working our way up, which you can see somewhat represented on this slide. So you can imagine a page in our app. Let's take the list of healthcare plans that you would see when you're deciding which one to enroll in. And you start with the smallest, outermost tree in that component tree, basically. It might be the plan header, right? So you convert that to a React component, and you're passing in state from Angular still, like the plan name that gets displayed. And then as time goes on, you start to convert more of those outer leaves, and all of a sudden the whole plan card maybe is now being rendered in React. And as time goes on, those React components get bigger, and they get more complex, and they handle more of their own state. And then eventually, once all the plan cards are in React, you can convert the list to React. Maybe there's filtering options at the top of the page, convert those to React. And then eventually the whole page is one React component with, child components. That's perhaps getting some state from Angular still, but is doing a lot of its own internal state management. And once you do that enough, you get to the point where almost all the HTML in your app maybe is being rendered with a React, which is great. So we actually did some of this conversion work with the old design still, as the new designs were being finalized and prioritized with our government product owners, things like that. Sorry, I see a question, or I see a chat. I can't actually see it, so should I respond to it?
It's a comment saying that your presentation is great so far. So it's a nice comment.
Cool, thanks. Sorry, I'm not used, I don't know if I should.
No, Yeah, I was going to say, depending on what you want, some people might ask questions in chat, or people can ask them aloud. It's all dependent on what you would rather have. I'm trying to think if there's an easy way for people to unmute and ask questions. I'll have to see if I can actually do that. But yeah, it depends on what your preference is.
I think because it's hard for me to like see the thing. If you want to read the questions out, like I can try to answer them. I'll definitely have time for questions at the end too.
Okay, yeah. Would you want to ask, would you want me to let you know when there's questions as they happen, or do you want to wait till the end?
Um, I can do them as we go if something comes up, or people can save them for the end if that's easier, because I can easily go back to slides and stuff too.
Okay, yeah, either one. So.
All right, cool.
Yep.
Oh, so what I was saying, yeah, so we did some of this initial conversion work with the old designs actually before the new design was like officially okay, which was good because it gave us practice writing React components in this way. And we could release it and it was invisible to the end user, but we knew that internally we were changing a lot. And so it gave our product owners, confidence that what we were doing wasn't gonna like break anything basically. And like I said, it was a significant internal change that made the eventual redesign easier. All right, so this is one of the two like most technical slides. So, all right, we used a library called ngReact to render React inside of Angular. And I'll briefly go over this code. Some of it is very like boilerplatey Angular stuff that is not that important. So I'm gonna do my best. So in the bottom here, you can see this household entry tag situation. And this is the Angular directive that we put inside our view basically. A directive in Angular are essentially web components that you define as a custom HTML tag. Angular's whole proposition to developers was that you could extend HTML and create your own HTML tags that encapsulate functionality. ngReact works by basically having you define a wrapper directive whose only job is then to render a React component. So Angular reads this as a directive, but it's actually a React component. Here's the directive definition itself. We start by importing this React component and then do some dependency injection magic. But the key thing here is this React directive function, which is something that ngReact gives us. The first parameter is the name of the component. The second is a list of static props that we're passing in. Props is a React term. It's basically, it stands for properties. It's basically the data that you pass down into a React component from outside of it. And in this case, we're not passing anything down from Angular into React. And this is a good sign. This would happen near the end of our conversion process because it means that our component, whatever it is either getting its state from somewhere else, in this case from Redux, or is managing its state on its own. The third parameter is some Angular specific config that we never needed. And then the final parameter is another way to pass props in, props that are Angular injectables. Essentially, this is how we pass Redux, how we let Redux be read from our React components that are being rendered in Angular. Redux is our state management solution. So we're passing in global app state this way. And I'll talk about ngReact on the last slide. And this is some kind of more boilerplate to register the directive in our Angular app. And so another thing that would happen once we got more of our of the app into React is that we actually started using React Router as well. So we'd have one big parent component that would have React Router and then render separate routes inside of this React component, still inside of Angular at the time. So we started chunking the app into like sub-routes that were all React. And that was really nice because we didn't have to write as many of these wrapper directives. But the view layer is only part of an app, right? We also have state. Like I said, maybe a good way to structure things is to have your state solution be somewhat separate from your view solution, which gets back into the whole libraries versus frameworks thing I talked about before. In our case, we needed to slowly move state out of Angular and into another place, but still be able to have Angular and then React, as we're building this out in React as well, read and write from this state location while we're going through this conversion. The good news is that Redux, while commonly used with React, can be used with Angular as well via this ngReact library. Redux works by having a single object store all of its state, and this is referred to as the store. So we were able to create a store and then have both Angular and React read and or write to it. So as we were building up our Redux store, we used this strategy of double writes for a while. That would be having an Angular controller write to Redux, as well as utilize existing Angular services, and services are the way that Angular shares state between controllers, basically. It's Angular's a way that Angular manages its own state. So we'd be keeping track of state in Angular and then keeping track of that same state in React. So this way we could ensure that as we were building up our store and the actions to update it, that we were doing it in a way that made sense. So instead of creating the store and immediately having Angular read and write to it, we could have Angular write to the store initially, but not read from it. The Redux has really good developer tools, so you can look at the state of your application over time as you're going through the app and see exactly how it's being updated. This is one of the hallmarks of Redux, is it's like time travel debugging tools. And so it was really useful for us to do this, make sure that our store looked correct, but we weren't switching all the functionality in Angular to read from that store. Because eventually what we were trying to do is move off of Angular, right? I hope that makes sense. I'll walk through this code and maybe that'll help explain what I mean. This is in a controller in Angular. This controller is for like a filter panel view. It's helping to filter plan cards. So first we're using an ES6 wildcard import to import all of the exported file or functions from this file, basically. And this file is all the actions related to filters that we wrote for Redux. So specifically action creators. You can just think of this as the functions that we call to update the Redux store. And then we're using the ngReact connect function, which connects the Angular controller to the Redux store. It takes two parameters. The first is if you want to connect state from the store into your controller. In this case, we actually didn't want to do that because we didn't want to read from the Redux store in Angular at this point in time. So this is undefined. And then the second parameter binds the actions that update the store to the controller, which this to here basically. And that's all being added to scope. And scope is yet another Angular term. That's the glue between the controllers and the view, basically. Scope is what you can access in the views, basically, in Angular. So this maybe is an example of something like we've converted part of this filter panel to React, but some of it's still in Angular, but we want the state management we want the state to start being pushed into React. So scope.setFilter is probably being used in an Angular view and is like an on-click handler or something. So someone clicks on it, set filter, you're setting it with a value. And then we're calling Redux here. Set by division is one of the functions that's being imported from this filter actions import here, as well as we're calling the exact same, with the exact same value, we're calling an Angular service as well. So this is kind of what I mean by double writes. This is maybe the most difficult thing to explain, and I hope I did an okay job. But so you can probably tell from all of this that this gets fairly into the weeds of how Angular and React and Redux all work. And managing this complexity and planning it out is something that we needed to do as a team. And so we used RFCs, or requests for comments, to do this. RFCs are commonly used in open source to propose large technical changes and come to consensus on them. Someone writes a proposal and then opens it up for a set period of time for comments. And then asynchronously, usually it's done via GitHub, a consensus can be reached. I didn't mention this earlier, but Ad Hoc is actually pretty much 100% remote within the US. So RFCs were particularly good for us because they're asynchronous by nature. And then when you're done, you have a really nice written document that can be stored somewhere as a record of decisions that you made. Another thing that we did, to make this process easier is use feature flags. This allows you to merge changes as early as you want, as long as they're behind a feature flag. The CMS approved technology for this is called Launch Darkly. There are likely other companies that do this too. Launch Darkly has really easy bindings into Redux. So we could set flags, and then those flags could be read in both Angular and React. This is the screenshot from Launch Darkly's marketing docs, but our dashboard in Launch Darkly looks very similar to this. You literally just click a button and it turns a flag on or off, and the changes are propagated to the app via server-side events, I believe, server-sent events. I linked to the docs there because they're pretty interesting to read through. And anyways, they're propagated to the app within milliseconds, basically. A really nice thing about this is that it can be configured per environment, which is really useful because it means that we can turn flags on in testing environments and then have QA work happen there on the same code base as exists in production, just with a flag. So you don't have to manage separate versions of your app for testing. And they also make it easier to gradually roll out a new design. And that's what we did. Our designer came up with the term design islands, which I thought was a nice term, which are places where we could roll out the new design in pieces without doing it all at once. For example, the new plan cards, you can see the old one at the top and the new at the bottom. The new plan cards worked in this old blue design, so we could roll them out early behind a feature flag. This helped our users get accustomed to the design, and also built confidence that what we were building worked, right? So in the end, before open enrollment in 2019, so this past fall, we were able to roll out the redesign for window shopping and plan compare. And you can see from the old and the new screenshot on the bottom that it was a fairly dramatic change. So the new apps are built with React and Redux, and they use CMS design system components. As of today, every app except for Plan Compare is 100% Angular free. Plan Compare is definitely the most complex of all the apps, and there's still some state that we have to deal with in Plan Compare still, that's still bound heavily to controller hierarchy in that app. But we're working on it. So as with any technical decision, there are always downsides. The main ones that I can think of is bundle size. The nature of web apps is that they're served over the network, and doing this incrementally means that there's a period of time when we're setting both React and Angular and their dependencies in our bundle, and I don't think there's a great way to get around that. There's also CSS issues, especially with the redesign, right? You're adding a new design gradually, and even if it's behind feature flags, when you turn that flag on, you need to ensure that the CSS looks correct. We got around that because we had our design system, which has CSS utility classes. If you've ever used Bootstrap, Bootstrap has similar utility classes. That helped a lot. You could also, we didn't do this, but you could also use styled components in React to potentially get around this. And then of course, there's just complexity with maintaining two integrated code bases for a period of time. And hopefully things like RFCs and good documentation and sound code review techniques can help with that. Anyways, I hope this talk has encouraged you to appreciate and love software maintenance and to think about strategies to keep your apps evergreen, so updated and maintainable, while maintaining a high level of service and good experience to your users. And I can definitely take questions. I might stop sharing so I can read. I'll probably do that. I don't know, it's easier. "34 minutes.
Yep, if everybody has any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat, and we'll see them. That was a great talk. I really liked it too.
do we use any tools to keep dependencies up to date after changing to React? I mean, that's a good question. So one thing, the design system that we use, like, depends on having like a certain version of React. We try to keep, like, we've tried to keep React updated because most recent versions of React have new functionality that we would like to use. For example, hooks are a newish thing in React that we haven't started using, but we'll probably start to rewrite some things in hooks. I believe that newer versions of React also have like stuff, which is something that we needed. It says my internet connection is unstable. But I mean, that's a good, I mean, I can't think of any other specific tools that we use to do that. It's always a problem though, like, I mean, the React world now is like kind of with hooks is kind of like using class components is almost becoming outdated in React now. And so you can start to run into the same problems again, potentially, and be aware of that, I think. Yeah. I think part of it is that the whole Angular situation was, the upgrade path between the two was not easy. And I think that was one of the reasons that Angular sort of fell out of popularity. I hope that answered your question at least a little bit. All right, I guess if no one else has any questions, it's probably good to go, right?
Yep, we should be all set. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if I should unmute everybody so we can all do like applause. Let's see what happens. I just don't want to screw everything up.
I think we can unmute ourselves.
Oh, okay. Well, that's even better. So how about everybody unmute and give Hannah a round of applause, because that was an excellent talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Best I've seen today. That was great.
Oh, thanks.